I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city.
Bioshock is a first-person shooter video game that was released back in 2007 by 2K Boston, that would later become Irrational Games, and was the vision of Ken Levine. It's a game that still holds up today. It's a game that was a spiritual successor to a spiritual sequel, shall we say, to System Shock 2, a game that is revered by game fans alike. It's just, where do we even start with this, Dave?
Well, I want to preface this by saying, if you have gone 8 years without playing Bioshock, stop the podcast. Go down to your local GameStop.
You can get it for like £3.
Come back, play it, and then listen. There are going to be spoilers coming up. Normally, I don't like to, spoil it up, but this is a game, like I said, that's been out for 8 years now at this point. I think it's safe to say that we can talk about it. And if you haven't played it yet, you should really get on that. And definitely come back and finish the podcast, because we want the traffic. We want the clicks. But
we're all about the clicks over here.
Yeah, I have some, before we get into it, I love Bioshock. I have some thoughts that I want to express, perhaps some that are controversial. We're going to get into it here, so I'll leave you lead things off. This is your book club selection, so we'll talk about it.
Okay.
You can kind of lead the discussion here.
So the story tells of the protagonist, Jack, who crashes in his airplane into the ocean. This is in the 1960s. And he ends up making his way down to the underwater city of Rapture. And both Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, and we can kind of make some comparisons between the two of them, in terms of being games that set the scene, in terms of world building, there are few games that match Bioshock for giving you
almost fearless.
For giving you an introduction to the world that you're about to enter. If you haven't played it, I'm not going to say anything, you just go and do it. If you have played it, you know exactly what I mean, and you can go and watch the video of it now on YouTube, and I just remember the first time seeing that and my jaw aghast. And they managed to fucking do it again with Bioshock Infinite as well. Yeah, we won't talk too much about Infinite. So from there, you make your way through, and just pretty quickly you get this just real sense of claustrophobia, being underwater at all times, and just the scene that it sets. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to pass it over to you and let you respond your thoughts on that.
I think, and not to be that guy, I know your gimmick is Majora's Mask and mine seems to be Silent Hill, but possibly since Silent Hill 2, where, as I said last week, I believe that it was the game that realized that the town was the main character in the game. Rapture is one of the, like you said, the most immersive, the most complete, the most awe-inspiring game worlds I have ever been in, bar none. I think, hopefully, we've played the clip before this feature where you hear the voice of Andrew Ryan talking about Rapture, and it's a very kind of Randian kind of selfish society that he's built under the water. It is an amazing reveal going down in the bathysphere. It is amazing going around there. You say it's a first-person shooter, but a lot of it, and it's not something that's that kind of stays with all the Bioshock games, because there's certainly a different vibe off Infinite, but there's considerable horror elements to this game. It has the classic horror trope of the start at the start of the kind of you insufficiently equipped deal with an enemy, a very scary enemy who's in the dark somewhere and you don't know where. Shall we get into the story?
Well, before you say that, or before we go into that, I mean, the key thing I think to really take away is when you think of the time of when Bioshock came out, you know, this was around the time where the online multiplayer scene of the Xbox 360 was really coming into its own with Call of Duty Modern Warfare, or Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. And the key thing you mentioned there is the idea of being able to take that element of making you really feel like that you was kind of fucked at all occasions.
Hopeless and alone.
Yeah. And I'm fine with Call of Duty 4. I actually quite enjoyed the storyline campaign in that. But it doesn't have that kind of key ingredient of really making you feel, really making you feel like you're there and that you're a part of that environment. And as you said, making you feel alone and trapped.
I'll give you the timeline for me on Bioshock. Bioshock came out, like you said, in 2007, which was at a time where I had just started college when I did my undergrad, and I really was kind of out of love with games at that point. I wasn't playing them an awful lot, kind of apart from my usual go-to of FIFA and the odd game here or there. So Bioshock, even though I had heard the great things about it, completely missed me at the time. It wasn't until I think Infinite was nearly out, because like I said, there was that space between 2007 and 2000 and late 2012, early 2013, where I really wasn't playing anything. But the first time I saw a teaser or a TV spot or something for Bioshock Infinite, I went out and pre-ordered it and said, you know what, I should play even though they said, canonically speaking, they're separate worlds and all this, I still wanted to play the first one, although everybody had warned me against playing the second one. So this is me kind of late 2012, early 2013 getting to this, and kind of, it just, like you said, it just blows your mind. There was nothing like it at the time. There was still nothing like it in late 2012 when I was playing it, and it's something I could easily go back to now, say in the form of an HD collection, hint hint. But some of the things I want to talk about here, it's hard to, like you said, it's hard to kind of, what do I jump to, what do I talk about? Should we talk about the big kind of the big moment everybody talks about?
Yeah, we can go there.
So when you arrive in Rapture, you encounter through a kind of headset or a kind of a voice box this character of Atlas, this man who is kind of your Sherpa going through Rapture, telling you what to do, telling you all about Andrew Ryan. He's the man who, the audio logs help considerably as well, but he very much kind of establishes the world for you, establishes the history of Rapture, building up this Andrew Ryan guy, this mythical figure. And then, how do you even, Mark? How do you even talk about Would You Kindly?
It's hard to do, and it kind of defeats the purpose of me saying this, because obviously we do a podcast to talk about it, but it's hard to say without you playing it to really understand it, because the key thing is when you play it for the first time, you don't realise it, until that moment when the penny drops, and that's the genius of it.
Yeah, it is one of the best storytelling twists ever in a video game, for me anyway. One of the moments where Bioshock has done it to me several times, because and it will be a future book club entrant, but Bioshock Infinite certainly did the same kind of jaw hanging on the floor moment, so there's that moment with the Would You Kindly. I'm not going to kind of go blow by blow for it, because presumably the only people still listening are people who have played it themselves. Just that, it's just mind-blowing, and the kind of like, I should have seen it. And then, like, that's where the replay value for Bioshock comes in as well, a lot. Not just because it's a great game and the mechanics are pretty damn good as well. Going through and looking at the audio logs, listening to Atlas, and seeing how you should have seen it coming. that it was surprisingly signposted for something that caught you by surprise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like a lot of the things that was done in the original Bioshock, they tried to. I feel like it was almost, and this is going to get a little bit controversial because I'm not as big of a fan as Bioshock Infinite as you are. Not to say that I don't like it.
We're certainly about to have a discussion coming up in a few moments. Yeah. Continue.
But I feel there are certain elements that feel more forced into Infinite, and one of those is the audio logs. Their implementation in the original Bioshock is a piece of genius in terms of giving you more of a story of rapture and giving it a way to you that isn't just kind of lazily hashed in. You know, it's the kind of Half-Life approach of giving you the story as you play in game. And you know, one of the biggest comparisons you can really give to Bioshock is Half-Life, because you see the game, you see the story through the eyes of the main character, and you essentially are the main character. And there's very few games that can do that and do it well. Bioshock and Half-Life, two of those games that do it very, very well.
I think, kind of to continue on that comparison between Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, the controversial thing I have to say, brace yourself, are you sitting down, are you sitting comfortably?
I'm sitting. Not comfortably, because this chair sucks.
I think, I don't know how to word this to make you not come and kick my ass. I think the way story is structured in Bioshock Infinite, the 3 acts, the order in which they happen, is better structured than the original Bioshock. And I will explain why before you scream at me for the next 30 seconds.
I will do no such thing, because it will clip the microphone and then it'll be a hassle to edit this afterwards.
The twist happens in the original Bioshock, and then you keep playing for several hours. Culminating, several hours of fetch quests that don't really advance the story, culminating in a truly pointless boss battle, which really doesn't do a service to the amazing first and second acts of that game. If that game ends with you realizing the would you kindly and clubbing the shit out of Andrew Ryan, and the game just fucking ends, that is art, that is perfection. But nothing that follows that needed to happen. There are a couple of cool scenes later on in the game that people might bring up. Some of the stuff, when you realize Atlas is Frank Fontaine, and some of the stuff he says is quite interesting. But again, you could elongate that would you kindly kind of that scene to get that information in. The other thing that someone brought up to me when I mentioned my kind of preference for Bioshock Infinite brought up to me is the scene where you awake in the room with the little sisters, and depending on whether you've been harvesting them or saving them, they'll react differently to you. They'll either be playing around on their beds or they'll be cowering in the corner afraid of you. That's a cool enough scene. But for me, pretty much everything that follows would you kindly it just feels like letting the air out of the balloon. Bioshock Infinite, the thing about Bioshock Infinite is that it drags in the middle. There is, I will grant you now, I love I love everything about Bioshock Infinite. I platinumed it and everything like that. I cannot get enough of it. I will absolutely play through it again at some point. I would love the HD version, blah, blah, blah. But the thing about Bioshock is Bioshock drags it a little bit in the middle. I can understand people who aren't necessarily feeling the combat and want more story. There is a couple of hours in there where it's almost all combat and very little story gets advanced. I understand that criticism, absolutely, but the thing you can't fault Bioshock on is that Bioshock ends at exactly the right time. Bioshock Infinite ends at exactly the right time. The big twist at the end, which, again, like I said, it's probably going to be a future book club entrance, so we won't get too much into the actual story of Bioshock, but the big event happens and the game ends. You see where I'm coming from here?
Yes. Now, I mean, I should point out at this point that even though we're doing this book club thing, that there are games that there are certain critiques to be pointed at with those games, and I do totally agree that
absolutely,
one of the biggest issues with the original Bioshock is, as you say, after that twist and the kind of final boss fight, it does falter at that point significantly. I do feel that up until that point, though, it's a near flawless piece of storytelling and scene building and character building and all of that.
Absolutely. Like, I know that the role of this segment is to talk about kind of a love letter to our favorite games, and this is still, do not get me wrong, this is still one of my favorite games.
Oh yeah.
And I do think, like we said, if that game ends with "Would you kindly," all that jazz, if it just ends there, it is hands down better than Bioshock Infinite. Because I love Bioshock Infinite, but Rapture is far more atmospheric than Columbia.
Yeah, and
you know what I mean?
One of the other things...
Like, I still love Columbia, but I can kind of objectively look at it and realise that Rapture is a better world building. And, you know, character building, I love the characters in Bioshock Infinite, so I'm slightly biased in that way. So I don't know so much about that. But I can definitely look and say, look, Rapture, definitely a better setting, a better world, a better feel than Columbia. So I can... Like I said, it's just that bit that lets it down, and I just kind of wanted to get that bit in there just before.
And like for me, one of the key things and one of the, you know, the big vocal points about the original Bioshock are the big daddies, and those fights, you know, they are some of the more intense moments I've had playing video games. And that kind of speaks for me really about Bioshock as a whole. All of the fights in that game, all of the times that you're in combat, it always feels like a life or death situation. It also feels very intense because of the claustrophobic environment you're in, because of the splicers and the way that they are, because of the confined environment you're in, and just because of the presence of the big daddies. It has that atmosphere that Infinite lacks.
The thing is, like, I think it's, and again, not to, because we could be here talking forever about these games because it's one of my favorite hobbies, but I think you've got to look at them as slightly different. This is such a weird comparison to make, but it's like looking at Terminator 1 and Terminator 2.
Yeah.
They're both excellent movies. Terminator 1 is a horror movie. Terminator 2 is an action movie. Bioshock 1 is a first-person shooter with incredible horror elements to it. Bioshock Infinite is an incredible first-person shooter that's more gunslinging, swashbuckling
It's an action film.
Yeah. With weird quantum physics in it.
But, yeah, and other elements. But the key thing out of all of that is it's why I think that and I think a lot of other people prefer the combat in the original Bioshock, because there isn't really that much difference between the two games. You know, you still have a gun and you still have your plasmids or whatever variation. But because of the confined space in the original Bioshock, it lends itself to that, I feel, a lot more. I feel that shooting in Infinite is a bit more... Just because it's so much more in an open world environment, you realise that the combat's a little bit looser than you'd like, and you'd like to be able to kind of really hone in on things a little bit better, but the weapons that you have available to you don't really lend themselves to that kind of style. And maybe it partly because to that point, by this point, we've been blessed, cursed, whatever, with, you know, a lot of your kind of modern shooters, and they have all the hone-in sniping types of shooting, and obviously the weaponry in the Bioshock games is not that advanced. You're not really going to have that kind of thing. But because of that, I do think that, and I totally agree that the actual tone of the games are totally different, but the shooting is the same, and I think that it lends itself a lot more to the original Bioshock.
Absolutely. Like, I think if we're going to kind of...
Which is why the Big Daddy fights are that much better than the... I can't remember what the hell they're called in Infinite.
Handyman.
Yeah, I fucking hate the Handyman fights.
Man. There's not to talk to me, because there will be, I promise there will be a day where we talk about Bioshock Infinite, but there's a trophy on that game to get the platinum where you have to kill the handyman by only shooting it in the heart, which I don't even want to talk about how trying to get that trophy made me feel. It was a bad time. It was a bad time. But no, I think if we're going to close on it, I don't want to come off as if I had been too negative about Bioshock. It's just kind of, I had that one thought about it that I kind of wanted to get out there, but it certainly is It is absolutely one of the best games I've ever played. And I think if you haven't played it, if you haven't touched the Bioshock series, get yourself Bioshock Infinite, and to tie up the whole universe, get the Burial at Sea DLC. To kind of, if you're really into that world, if you want kind of more story, you want more Tales of Rapture, more Tales of Columbia, get that DLC and treat yourself. Bioshock 2, from what I know of it, because I haven't played it, from what I know of it...
You've never played Bioshock 2?
No, because I have almost been slapped in the face by people at the very thought that I would dare to try and play it, because it...
I almost want to slap you in the face for not playing it.
Is it good? Like, this is the thing. Right?
No. It's not whether that I think that it's a good game or a bad game. It's just, it's part of that universe. So why would you? It's like, I know Terminator Genesis is going to be a piece of shit, but it's still part of the Terminator universe, and I'm going to see it for that reason.
Brought it back to Terminator. I like that you brought it back to Terminator. No, it's just that, like, literally, over half a dozen separate people who don't really know each other. When I said, my plan when I bought Bioshock, because I bought the Ultimate Rapture Edition, so I had Bioshock and Bioshock 2, and I was going to play through both of them before Infinite came out, and I had people, like, vitriolically tell me not to even dare to touch Bioshock 2.
Most people are broken inside.
To the extent where I was kind of like, no matter, even if it's a part of the franchise, no matter, like, if enough people that you generally trust start telling you just don't even because it's awful, you're not going to really feel enthused about playing the game. You know what I mean?
Dave, my word is gospel. It's not that bad.
Okay, well, once E3 passes and 2K definitely listen to this podcast and release the Bioshock HD trilogy, I will play it.
It has some elements that are quite good, and it has a better ending than the original Bioshock, which, in the grand scheme of things, isn't particularly difficult.
Yeah, in fairness. Yeah, well, I might play that, so. But yeah, basically, Bioshock, big thumbs up. Play it or sort your life out.